Gotta catch 'em all. That was the Pokemon slogan for a while, and by the 5th generation, achieving that became a little difficult with 649 Pokemon. You always needed multiple games and multiple different systems to pull it off, but by Generation 5 they finally decided to give you a reward for completing the Pokedex. And for a nerd like me who enjoys differently colored pixels, we have to catch 'em all to help us find more of these differently colored pixels. But this time I wondered, how fast could I do it? Today we'll be completing the entire Black 2 National Pokedex, catching the first 649 Pokemon as fast as possible. So we'll just boot up the game and oh, I don't have a save file yet. That's right, we're starting from absolutely nothing. So phase 1 here is beating all of the games we need. And I conveniently had all of the games we needed in Japanese. Since they're generally cheaper than English copies, I've been building up my collection, and now it's actually almost done. And you can help me finish it by subscribing to the channel. It's free for you and helps me out a ton. I started our journey with Black 2. Where we do the intro, meet up with Hugh, and grab our starter. And god dang it, I've already lost time. See, it probably would have been smart to study the speedrun for this game, as that's essentially what I'm doing here. But for this first part, I didn't. And choosing Oshawott is a massive time loss. A real speedrunner would choose Tepig, using it for the first few gyms before switching over to Excadrill. Whereas I chose Oshawott and also caught a Riolu from the ranch. With it no encounter, I'd have a pretty easy time with the first badge. Though I'd have to train up Oshawott a little bit with Audino to get the second badge. Even still, I didn't feel like I was bleeding time. That is, until I took about a half hour trying to beat the third gym with one of these guys. Leavanny just hard walls both of them, obviously because it's a grass type for Dewott. But even by level 28, Riolu was still not good enough to take down Berg, and had not yet evolved into Lucario. Just love me, Riolu. Why don't you love me? Desperate for some progress, I went all the way back to Verbank, grabbed a Growlithe, trained it up a little bit, and with some save scumming was able to take it down while underleveled. But isn't this the best way to start a speedrun, having an hour of time loss immediately? And like a real speedrunner, we'd skip my opportunity to get Drilbur and just meet up with Colress after the gym, and blast through Join Avenue to reach Nimbasa City. With a little more grinding and doing the old gym battles, Riolu would finally evolve into Lucario. But because it took so long, I didn't get Bone Rush to have a ground type move for the gym. I'd have to brute force my way through with the power of Paralyze Heals and Lemonades. However inefficient it may have been, we now have 4 gym badges, and can cross over to Driftvale for the 5th gym. Something you might be wondering is, how many games do we have to play to be able to complete the Pokedex? If you're familiar with the older games, you'd know it's quite a few. But I wanted to know just how fast could you complete the speedrun? And to help us go that extra bit faster, glitches are going to be allowed. To be honest, I don't think I used a single glitch in any of the Gen 5 games. However, as many of us know, Gen 4 has a ton of glitches, and being allowed to use these glitches will save a ton of time. And it'll bring the amount of required games all the way down to 4. I ended up using 5 and we'll go over why that is later. But today I'll be using Black 2, Black and White, Diamond and Soul Silver. Today we'll need to travel from Sinnoh to Unova. Maybe we're staying in one of the fancy hotels in Driftvale. Just look at that complimentary Tower of Bulbs. So fancy. We'll need to connect to free hotel Wi-Fi to send Mom pictures of all the Pokemon we've caught so far. But this network was a trap, set up by a hacker to steal our data. And as we're sleeping, our Trainer Book account gets hacked, and the hacker starts posting memes about Johto being the best region. If only our dear trainer had today's video partner, NordVPN, watching their back. Their online activities would have been encrypted on this phony network, and our data would have been safe on our journey around the world. And you would also have to travel around the world to watch all of the Pokemon content on Netflix. But before you start booking flights, check out NordVPN. Not in America, but want to watch Detective Pikachu? With NordVPN, now you are. And now you're in for a very cursed movie night. Or maybe you are in America, but you want to watch the series X and Y. If only you used my link to get yourself NordVPN on an exclusive 2-year plan with 4 bonus months for free. We could just hop on over to South Korea, so Ash could hop on into Kalos. Use my link at nordvpn.com/trailspokemon to take advantage of this exclusive creator deal. Any 2-year plan comes with 4 bonus months for free. And you can also enjoy a BORB-approved 30-day money-back guarantee. Once again, nordvpn.com/trailspokemon. Thanks to our partners at NordVPN, we can continue our travels through Unova worry-free. Back in Driftvale, I'd swap over to Dewott because of our ground-type weakness on Lucario, and after one attempt at Clay, I decided to evolve into Samurott first. Yeah, the Black 2 gameplay was not optimal at all. At least we'd completely demolished the World Tournament though. I stuck with Samurott as the main for the 6th gym as well, because we'd be getting a bit of an upgrade in the steel fighting type department soon. As in Black and White 2, we have early access to Cobalion once we reach Lacunosa Town, and we also have the option to use Virizion before the 7th gym as well. Part of my Shiny Hunter brain says I should have saved these for later, allowing me to Shiny Hunt them with the charm, but seeing as they were right there and I wasn't even sure if the Shiny Charm worked on them or not, I decided I would just catch them. And I'd be able to do that in one of the more recent games anyway, perhaps in Sword and Shield where the Shiny Charm does work on them. And it's evidently an easy enough hunt that someone in my Discord server is mark hunting for a Shiny Virizion. They've reset over like 20 Shiny Virizion, man. With the power of Cobalion, we'd blast through the 7th and 8th gyms. But are we actually blasting? We're like several hours behind the worst speedrun on the leaderboard, and we still haven't beaten the game yet. It was taking long enough that I decided to call it there and return to action another day, having a whopping 8 Pokemon to my name, filling out an astonishing 11 entries in the Pokedex. I know it looks bad, but once we finish the game, we'll have enough money to buy all the Pokeballs we need, and we'll be able to fly around everywhere, so the actual catching part is going to become a lot easier. And since I am not a top-level speedrunner for these games, I would not be doing this in a single segment. But honestly, a goated speedrun gamer might be able to pull this off in a single segment run. But since I am not, I would come back to it a few days later. And we'd start the day off great, with even more time loss. As you go about fighting Team Plasma, during one of the raids on their ship, you'll be met with 4 locks that require a passcode to deactivate. This passcode is random, and I didn't know this, and only found out once my password didn't work. And because I was playing in Japanese, I had no idea what the people were saying. Just learn Japanese, lol. Millions of people do it, it can't be that hard. Yeah, I'll just keep the timer running and we'll do that real quick. If you know all of the possible passwords, or look them up online, you can just try them all out until they work. So hey, that's some good time save, right? I don't have to learn Japanese now. Come to think of it though, we're gonna have AI translating things now, so is there even a point in learning a new language? Other than it being something to do when you're bored, I don't think there is one. After getting the right password, there was nothing stopping Cobalion from actually destroying the rest of the game. With the Lucky Egg and solely focusing levels on it, we'd be quite over-leveled by the time we faced off with the champion. I'd do some additional setup for the save file, fighting N to unlock Zekrom, and stocking up on balls for catching Pokemon later. But having completed the main story of Black 2, we would travel back in time to the original Black and White, saving the catching portion for once I actually had a plan on how to do that fast. You know, kinda like how a normal speedrun would. With the whole debacle of Black 2 behind me, I actually studied the speedrun for Black and White, with its intense, big brain strategy of just using Lillipup. That's it, you just catch a Lillipup before the first gym and you sweep through the whole game with it. With Workup, Stab Return, Crunch, and Reversal for Steel and Rock type coverage, you really won't struggle with anything in the game. It still took me a bit under 6 hours, but at least this time, that is faster than the worst time on the leaderboard. I did this in 2 segments though, having also started the opposite copy of the game while I wasn't streaming. Speaking of which, here's a PSA of sorts, my Twitch username has now changed to match the YouTube channel. Come join the chat in Dino Dancing and a crippling gambling addiction. Don't gamble your actual money though. For the opposite copy of the game, I managed to complete it in about 5 hours and 20 minutes, improving a bit from the run before. So overall, to get all 3 of our Gen 5 save files set up for catching Pokemon, it took around 20 hours. Not terrible with my lack of experience in speedrunning these games, but probably still could have been better, mainly looking at the Black 2 segment. But in the meantime, I had devised that actual plan for catching all of the Pokemon fast. So the stream after we were done with the story, we'd finally start actually catching Pokemon. Wait, we have to catch Pokemon to complete the Pokedex? Oh, of course, you know, that makes sense. So far, we had the starters, the Swords of Justice, a couple other Pokemon, and the legendary dragons, who were perhaps a bit too easy to catch. It'll be fine, surely. Surely. Ain't no way, brother man. He's hacking. Hacking hacker. Hold on guys, I know it looks sus here, but getting lucky is not a crime. But it was officially time to start Phase 2, catching the Gen 5 Pokemon. And while there probably is a guide for this already because of the Professor Oak's challenge, I wouldn't be needing that because I had the paper TM. The paper here was to guide me through everything I needed, where to catch all of the base form Pokemon at the highest level, and what level or method everything needed to be able to evolve. The only question remaining was where to begin. With everything laid out before me, I knew one Pokemon had to be my first priority. That's Woobat. Doing the bulk of the Gen 5 Pokedex in Black 2, this is going to be my only required friendship evolution. But since we'll be doing quite a bit of running around the region doing other things, if we grab one early, it can passively gain friendship, being ready to evolve by the time I would start the evolution spree. Specifically, I would get Woobat in the Mistralton Cave. In the process, grabbing Axew as well as some nearby Mons on Route 6, Swadloon, Tranquil, Fungus, and Shaymin. I'd also grab the hidden ability Deerling before heading back to Castelia City to get the experience share I never got. And since I'm in the area, I might as well head towards the professor's lab to unlock the ability to fly here later. But after that, it's time to get perhaps the worst section out of the way, the forest. The Pinwheel and Lost Lorn forests hold a large variety of Pokemon, particularly in the Shaking Grass. There's both mandatory Pokemon like the Elemental Monkeys and optional time savers, being Leavanny saving us a Friendship evolution and Whimsicott saving us a Sunstone evolution. Now for the monkeys, 10% per monkey isn't too bad, and of course you could just get lucky. Just hope you don't get lucky in a bad way. Frick! Bruh. 3 monkeys in a row? Probability, a blessing and a curse in the world of Pokemon. Somehow, this would happen to me for each of the 3 monkeys. They were trolling me so hard, I had to take a break from the forest, choosing to go back to the early routes in the meantime. After a couple trips back, I'd finally find Pansage. In the process, finding Leavanny, but not a Whimsicott. With the Forest Mons done, I'd head to Celestial Tower and Chargestone Cave to grab Elgium, Litwick, Joltik, Ferroseed, Tynamo, and Clink. Then we can turn our attention to the Desert Resort. Quite a few encounters here, the worst of which for me being Dwebble, another 10% encounter rate Pokemon, and that's the only area to catch it in. I guess I was pretty unlucky with these 10% Pokemon, especially cause I wouldn't even find Dwebble here. I had to give up. I did already have Crustle from the main story, and I figured I could just breed it if I never found one, because there is some required breeding to do anyway. Black and White too have access to Pokemon from the other regions, unlike in the originals, and because of how these Pokemon are distributed, some of the Gen 5 Pokemon end up not being found in the wild at all. These Pokemon are Blitzel, Cubchoo, Golett, Vanillite, Dino, Timple, and Larvesta. Some of these are available in the originals though, so if we're nearby, it'd be a nice bit of time save to grab them. Speaking of Larvesta though, after the desert, it's time for the Relic areas, Relic Castle and Relic Passage. We can grab the Static Volcarona, and while we're in the area, grab Yamask, Boldore, Girder, Timber, and Roggenrola. And having not found one in the forest, I'd also make a pit stop for Whimsicott in the Castelia City Garden. And here in Gen 5, long gone are the days of too much water, as one of our only water routes is completely isolated in the corner of the map. Here we'd grab some water Pokemon and hit the P2 lab to save some time on the Clink evolution line. And at this point, to be honest, I was kind of just jumping all across the map, going to whatever area would get me the most progress at once. So after grabbing Stunfisk and Palpitoad, we'd head to Victory Road. This area having a ton of the late game Pokemon we need. The Dragons, the Karate Guys, the Tauros clone, and the version exclusive bird. Rufflet or Vullaby though are an abysmal 5% encounter rate, so finding a Vullaby took me over 20 minutes. In the meantime though, we caught an Amoonguss, gaining some additional time save. The list of evolution lines we still need is looking pretty scarce by now, but one of the few remaining locations is up there with the forest, with the worst of the bunch. And that's Twist Mountain. Here there's a good variety of Pokemon, but making it a pain is this is the only place to grab some of these Pokemon. Heatmore and Cryogonal are only found here, and Beartic is only here unless it's winter. The good news is you can make things more likely based on the season you're here, but I was being stubborn, viewing changing the clock as a time loss, even though I was doing this in the worst season possible, autumn. This condemns Cryogonal and Heatmore to a 5% encounter rate, Beartic to a 10% encounter rate, and gives us a 40% chance of finding Boldore instead of something useful. If you want to be stubborn, winter is the best season, as Heatmore will be the only 5% you need, with everything else being at least 15%. In my case, autumn would prove to be a struggle to find Heatmore, eventually finding 3 or 4 Cryogonals and an Onix before finding one. But it took long enough that we'd get the evolutions for Swoobat and Sawsbuck. Once I finally had Heatmore, we were pretty much done with everything. I would just need to go find one Pokemon in a few different areas. The Dream Yard for Muna, Giant Chasm for Vanillish, Route 9 for Pawniard, and the Dragon Spiral Tower for Golurk, where we would also grab the legendary dragon on this save, with that completing everything I would need to catch in the sequels. And I would tackle the evolutions and level grinding off stream, using the Shaking Grass on Route 1 to find our highest level Audinos. Some Gen 5 experts out there might wonder about the experience point pass power, but here's the thing, I have literally never used that. And you know, I think doing it for the first time on Japanese probably wouldn't be a good time. So there's definitely some more time to be saved here if you know what you're doing with that. I also likely could have saved more time grabbing every higher evolution Pokemon that I could, but I was very low on Pokeballs and very low on money at this point. So with having to grind more money, I wasn't sure if I would actually be saving time by doing that, so I just stuck with all of the evolutions I had already. As it was, all of these evolutions would only take a single afternoon, almost exactly 5 hours to level grind everything, about an hour of which was just Hydreigon. I'd spend a few minutes also trying to catch a Ditto, but since it's a higher level and transforming into my Cobalion, I figured I would just wait until I transferred one from Gen 4 to do our breeding. And here's the elephant in the room. Why have I only been talking about catching Gen 5 Pokemon? As I've already mentioned, there's a good amount of previous generation Pokemon available in this game. Why am I not catching them? Well, it turns out the first 493 Pokemon in the franchise can all be obtained through just a single glitch, and therefore reducing the number of Gen 4 games we need to play from 3 or 4 down to just 1. And if you watched one of my recent videos where I did a tutorial for this glitch, you might understand where I'm going with this. It's time for Arbitrary Code Execution. Developed by the Void Matrix team with more human viable setups found by Retire, with one elaborate glitch setup, we can trick the game into doing basically anything we want. But there's a misconception about arbitrary code execution. Some seem to think that there's absolutely no difference between it and using an action replay or something similar. And that is just not true. There's a reason why one is always banned in speedrunning, unless it's the only thing that would make the speedrun bearable, whereas the other is generally allowed where glitches are allowed. An action replay is injecting unnatural code into the game that should not be there whatsoever. But with arbitrary code execution, the code you are using already exists somewhere within the game's memory, and you use a glitch that tricks the game into executing that memory as code. And for that code to exist in the game, you need to set up that region of memory with whatever would correspond to that code. And then of course glitch the game into reading it and perform what you want to do. The power for us to create that code is already in the game. You never have to connect the game to an outside source. If you don't consider it a legit way to play the game, that's fine, you're entitled to your opinion. But saying it's the exact same thing as cheating with an external tool is just completely wrong, and ignores the usually hours of actual gameplay needed to be done to accomplish it. For Diamond and Pearl, setting up the glitch involves quite a bit of setup. We'll start from a fresh save file and follow the speedrun by picking Chimchar. There might be potential for time save here using something else as your main Pokemon, as we only need 5 of the gym badges for the setup. Another thing we need is a Kakuna, which I thought I was going to be able to use my newly purchased Japanese leaf green cartridge for, allowing me to find one in Eterna Forest, but it turns out you need the National Pokedex unlocked for this feature to work, a detail I had completely glossed over. Seeing every Pokemon in the entire Sinnoh would obviously be a bit slow. So the good news is there are 2 other options. Option 1 is using RNG manipulation to find a particular Magikarp to evolve into a particular Gyarados. However, RNG manipulation would take additional time to set up, needing Chatot and the coin flip Poketch app to perform, and it can just take a long time to do correctly. So our other option is going to be a little bit faster overall, but it does require another game. In Soul Silver, Kakuna is available on just the second route of the game, so unlocking Pokeballs and catching one is pretty simple, unless you get unlucky like I did. I was doing it in the morning, making it to that pesky 10% encounter rate. Apparently even switching over to another game wouldn't save these from taking an eternity. And when I finally found one, I get a crit while trying to weaken it. And I accidentally kill it, making me spend another eternity tracking another one down, and I crit that one too. But it was early enough that I was able to catch this one. Even having all this trouble, this would still beat having to do the Gyarados. because fishing RNG manipulation is pretty quirky, and it took me 3 hours to do the first time. And that's with already knowing what I was doing when it came to RNG manip. After a simple trade to get Kakuna onto our Diamond game, I'd just need to finish up the 5th gym and begin the process of setting up our big glitch. Part of which involves having 3 specific Pokemon, Noctowl, Machoke, and Cacturne. But Cacturne you aren't able to get until the post-game, so to remedy this we'll of course need the Void glitch. And I maybe made a small error here. I walked one step too far, which got me completely trapped in the void, and I hadn't saved in a while, so I might have lost over 20 minutes here, because I had caught Machoke and Noctowl. But it was made even worse, because for the setup you need a Pokemon with a serious and a naive nature, and the original Noctowl had a naive nature. So on top of having to get them again, I had to go and catch a bunch of Route 1 Pokemon for the naive nature, with each nature being a 2% chance. But I would get pretty lucky here, finding both within catching 7 additional Pokemon. But if you thought that was bad, oh boy, there's a far more time-consuming part of the setup right here, where we have to enter the Hall of Fame 30 times. With just a Kakuna. Even with the Void glitch and my experience of having done this before, it took about 2 hours to get this done. Though part of this was getting Kakuna to level 6 so I could just rappel through the early routes to get back to the Void. With that done, my final tedious task was getting a bunch of money. We need enough money to buy 412 Paralyze Heals, 28 Pokeballs, 5 Great Balls, 4 Protects, and a Silk Scarf from the Game Corner. And because we didn't actually beat the Elite Four, we'll need to get that money by battling these rich people south of Hearthome City. Finally, the poor exploiting the rich, a taste of their own medicine. With all the varying setup tasks done, we can finally perform the glitch. Considering the tutorial for all of this took about 20 minutes to explain in the aforementioned previous video, I'll just refer you back to that if you want more information about it. But just know this was easily my best portion of this entire speedrun, as I unlocked Arbitrary code execution a mere 6 in-game hours after a fresh save file, which I think is the fastest anyone has ever done it yet. Though having to use the Kakuna setup made me sad, because Nurse Joy doesn't make the Blaziken sounds. When I talk to her, she just sits there, staring at me. Now with the ACE setup done, we can do the extremely tedious task of giving ourselves every Pokemon in the game. Using the add Pokemon script, we can quickly add a Pokemon of any species at any level into our party. Unfortunately, it's only to our party, and not to our boxes. The script will just fail if we have a full party already. On the bright side, we don't have to do 1 at a time, but we can still only do 5 at a time. Theoretically, you could add every Pokemon into the boxes with one single code, but that code doesn't exist yet. If any programmers out there want to help out with that, or making other codes possible, check out the Void Matrix Discord server, linked below. But it took me only 2 hours to get all 493 Pokemon this way, which was actually still slower than it could have been. For some reason, when I was setting up ACE this time, I ended up with 2 bad eggs in my party, who hatched into Missigno and made me incredibly worried that my save file was going to break. You can get rid of them, or at least get around them by increasing your party size, but I was still able to do 3 Pokemon at a time, and this is a speedrun after all, so I didn't really mind them. They're just like my buddies hanging out. Let's call them Tom and Jerry. But just like that, I had every Pokemon from generation 1 through 4 at level 100. So it was time to play the transfer minigame, which I did run into a couple of issues with. For one, if your Pokemon knows an HM move, it won't let you transfer it. Thankfully, out of all 493 Pokemon, only 3 naturally know an HM move at level 100. These 3 are Goldeen, Seaking, and Salamence. Goldeen and Seaking we can make another copy of at level 36, and make a Salamence at level 49. Which is actually illegal, but we don't have to worry about that. But I also faced a bigger issue. At one point after transferring my Pokemon, there was a communication failure, after which the Diamond save file got corrupted. I kept trying to connect the games, but not knowing how to read Japanese, I wasn't exactly sure what happened. So I booted up the game and I saw this. Very, very terrifying. But thankfully, starting in Gen 4, we have the backup save. So, aside from the minor heart attack and having to play the minigame an extra time, the save file corruption thankfully didn't affect us that much. So after 2 hours of transferring all of the Pokemon to Gen 5, our Pokedex was finally almost done. And the final leg of our journey was to just finish up catching everything else in the original Black and White, With the version exclusives, there's a bit more to work on in white than in black. I caught 2 Petalil, evolving 1 into Lilligant, a Solosis from Route 16, a Rufflet from Route 11, a Blitzel from Route 3, a Carablast from Route 6, I found a Dwebble in the desert going for the fossil, and I had grabbed a Ducklet for Surf and Fly during the story. Aside from needing Reshiram from black version, the other main reason to play these games is for the genies, Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus, who are all for some reason absent from the sequels. You can choose to play Dream Radar instead, but since you need to play black for Reshiram and also still need all of the white version exclusives, it probably ends up being faster to get them all in these games and just skip the Dream Radar. Something that would definitely have helped was remembering how to spawn them in the first place. This is something I skipped doing in my recent playthroughs of the game, so I wasn't aware that I needed to go talk to this old lady to actually be able to encounter them. I was sitting there on Route 7 for like a half hour, thinking I was just getting unlucky by not encountering it, because the last time I caught these guys was like 10 years ago. So the process of finding them had been pretty much wiped from my memory. I did recently catch Landorus though, so I knew that I needed to have both in the same game for that. With Landorus being our last big fish to fry, all I had to do was trade everything over to Black 2, finish evolving all of the white version exclusives, and I would breed for Larvesta, Dino, and Golett, giving me a Pokedex total of 645. And it turns out you don't need those last 4 Pokemon. To get the Shiny Charm, you actually don't need any of the mythicals, which is something I was aware that they did in more recent games, but I was not aware that's how it was from the very beginning. But if you do decide to take the Shiny Charm now, I mean, come on, you're not really catching them all now, are you? So while I would claim our Shiny Charm at the 46.5 hour mark, I wouldn't rest until my Pokedex total read 649. I mean, I would go to sleep because it was later in the day, but I would keep going is what I mean. Using the DNS exploit, we can connect to the PokeClassic network servers to receive the past mystery gift events, which will allow us to snag those final mythicals. But my god, do not attempt to do this quickly on the Japanese games. I'm not kidding when I say I would have saved several hours doing this on English. The main reason being here, there are a few events that you can claim multiple times on the Japanese versions. Combine that with Japan just getting more events in general, and you can end up filling boxes of Pokemon by the time you find the specific event you're looking for. You can save a bit of time here by skipping the events you've already claimed, and at the very least you'll want to reference some of the event listings on Bulbapedia to know what event text you're looking for. There's supposed to be some improvements to the mystery gift system, where the server remembers the gifts it's been giving you, but they did not seem to be working for Japanese whatsoever. This process took me maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours per game on English, but this took me about 7 or so hours for Japanese here, and that's with skipping most of the events I was given because I had already received them. I'm not really mad about all this though, because obviously it's better than having no gifts at all. And again, it's not required for the Shiny Charm, just a bit of extracurricular activities here. And so, with a final time of around 53 hours, I kinda stopped recording because the mythicals were taking so long, I completed the full National Pokedex of Black 2's 649 Pokemon. 53 hours is not too bad, but of course there was a lot of time save on the table. If you're a top level speedrunner, you probably would have been able to do the Gen 5 games in about 11 or 12 hours. The Gen 4 segment I did was pretty good, so maybe you save a half hour on that at most. Then you just need to consider catching and evolving everything, and that would probably take around 5 to 10 hours. So realistically speaking, somebody could do this in about 25 or 30 hours, with enough preparation and routing and whatnot. This begs the question, what about Gen 6? Gen 7? Well, it looks like you'll just have to subscribe for those.